for having me. And there we go. Always good to know. We have a nice little warning just in case someone doesn't know. Honestly, to be completely honest with you, there's nothing else I'd like to add. I think you did actually an awesome job of introducing me. Thank you all for having me, and thank you all for being here. If I speak too fast or start getting a little too excited and you can't understand me, please sing out, because I do that from time to time. But we'll just go through this and we'll talk about it, and I'll do the best I can to help y'all be able to get through your content tests. So let's get into exploration to the French and Indian War. Okay, so when we start with the 8th graders, it's actually kind of where I start with them too, just showing the map of Europe. This thing looks like somebody had paint in their hands and they basically sneezed through it, and it's all over the map. This is the kingdoms of Europe about the time of Columbus, about the late 1490s. And one thing I love to do with them is get them to try to sit here and recognize maybe a country or two that they know. Most of the time they can usually grab things like England or Britain, and that's really about it. Because the main thing here is that Europe at this point in time is very fractious. There's lots of fighting going on. And it's basically a big game of who can be the biggest and the baddest. Lots of warfare going on. And if I can get my little thing to be here, it's all about warfare, especially early on. There's lots of alliances and breaking and making and breaking of alliances. There's huge wars going on and all kinds of interesting things of that nature. Uh-oh. We have some people who are saying it's freezing on them. Uh-oh.
It's fine on my end. I think what they may be seeing is just the gray area where you're about to show a video, Mr. Ray.
No,
Okay.
like I can hear him. It's just that everybody's picture freezes and so does his.
Oh.
Like it just frozen, like it stops, like freezing to, yeah.
Oh, from time to time.
And then it does sound a little choppy, like he'll like a little bit, but I don't know, it may be us on our end here in the valley.
Oh, it might be.
It could be that, or it could be my Wi-Fi just acting up too. Every once in a while it does that.
So if it does start that, y'all, just kind of make sure you're watching and hearing what you can. And then when it comes questions, you know, we can further up or put it in the chat or whatever. That'd be good. Okay. And I can always follow up with y'all, but thank you for letting us know. One day, Mr. Ray, I literally was tethering on my phone and I didn't realize I was tethering on my phone. So they were like, literally, you're frozen and I can't see a thing. So I know. So I make sure I'm not tethering on my phone, I think. So I don't know if it's me, but yes, thank y'all for letting us know and keep us posted. Keep us posted. Okay.
Okay. So I guess we'll push on and hopefully the recording is not jumpy. But okay. I guess we'll just have to push on. Here we go. So yes, once again, it's all about who can basically bankroll the biggest army, things of this nature. Lots of good stories in here, but a little beyond where we need to go, because we need to start with exploration. Of course, the big thing for the Europeans at this point in time was spices. They're getting a lot of these from what we would call like India, the Spice Islands, which is like Indonesia, that area. It's all about making food that make it taste good, make it also maybe some things that'll make it preserve a little bit longer. All these things that were very, very, very expensive for Europeans. It's always gonna be about the bottom dollar. So they're trying to find ways to get to it first, because if they can get to it first, they can sell it for a higher price and make more money. Which means when it comes time to beat up the neighbor, you got more money to hire more soldiers. So this map, I do apologize, is a wee bit fuzzy. But you can see here, we have basically the trade routes kind of going around. Early on, we have the Italians who are trading with the Muslim world in the Mediterranean. They were originally one of the big power brokers when it came to like spices and things of that nature. Eventually, people will kind of start figuring out maybe we can cut out the middleman, and they'll find ways to get to India and the Spice Islands down around Vietnam and Thailand and Indonesia themselves. One of the first ones to do it, it's going to be the Portuguese, and they do it how I explain with the kids usually, of kind of like a little kid trying to cut across a pool without having to swim in it. They'll go along the coast of Africa, just kind of inch by inch, and find their way out there. Kind of do some things like the Phoenicians did back in the ancient world. Okay, so nothing else has popped up in the chat, so let's move along. And then, of course, comes one of the big men from your, teach some stuff you need to know for this one right here is going to be Columbus. Because one of the key things that's always fun is that really he was not the first guy to figure out the world was round. A lot of people did know it was round at this point in time. And the funny thing is, Columbus is actually wrong on one very important detail. He underestimated the circumference of the earth by about a third. So he starts thinking like, hey, if this thing's round, I can cut west and maybe I can get there and cut out the Portuguese, and maybe I can move faster. And he convinces the king and queens of Spain, King Ferdinand and Isabella, to bankroll them, and they basically decide, why not? They basically just completed the Reconquista. They've pushed the Moors, as they were called, back into Africa, and they have money to do it, and they'd figure, why not? Maybe they can get rich here. It's a risk. So Christopher Columbus cuts out across the Atlantic Ocean. Thankfully for him, he ran into some islands that no one really understood was there, what would later be called the New World. And he lands in what was originally modern day Haiti Dominican Republic, that was the island of Hispaniola. He lands there, and there's some debate whether or not he realizes exactly what's going on. Like, some people say that later on he does find out pretty quickly that this is not where he thought he was. But of course, one of the common stories is that he calls these people Indians because he thought he landed in India. He could not have been more wrong, but it's okay, because he did find a way into, or at least brought to the attention of the Europeans and Africa and Asia, the fact that there's a whole other two continents out there, at least another land masses out there that might have stuff that could help them. Okay. We also will have some other guys around here too. You could see them, like we'll have Magellan. We'll talk about him in a little bit, and we have Cartier and a few other guys who are going to pop up. Of course, the big thing for us though is, at least in 8th grade U.S. history, 8th grade U.S. history, and maybe down in the lower grades too, we do talk about the 3 Gs quite a bit, which is kind of an explanation of why these guys would get on a boat and possibly spend months at sea, maybe die, never come back, or maybe go through some harrowing things of starvation, running out of water, maybe just getting lost and never making it back home, or just dying a horrible death. One of the big ones, of course, is God. They talk about, a lot of times, a lot of these guys are going out there because religion is very large to the Europeans, as it is to most peoples at this point in time, and wanting to spread that religion, because according to Christianity, that is a huge thing. You want to go out and spread it to all the world. That's one of the ones that's going to be that is maybe a little rosier when people are saying this is why they're going to go out there. Maybe a little more pragmatic is gold. Basically, they're looking for trade, especially spices, later precious metals, and just profit. Because money buys nice things. It may not buy happiness, but it definitely makes misery more comfortable. And of course, there's glory, because the way we usually describe it with the 8th graders is kind of like dogs in like a yard. The more area you have, the bigger and badder you can feel. Sometimes it's adventure, just the idea of getting to go out there into the unknown, and this really fun thing of, like, instead of being a cobbler who's going to stay in the same city for all his life, you could go out there and see things your grandfather never even dreamed of. Or you have stories to tell that no one else would. Other one is going to be power, of course, because once again, making your country better helps you, because that means you might be able to beat up the neighbors or keep from getting beat up sometimes. And sometimes it's just patriotism, the fact that you love your country and you want to make it better. so far. Any questions so far, or are we all good? Okay, I'll take silence for go on. Okay, ladies and gents. So what's the key thing here? We start talking about this with the 8th grade. We do like to tell stories about the conquistadors, which we'll talk about, like Hernan Cortez. One of my favorite stories is with the Spanish, is a guy who, if I remember correctly, he's a cousin of Cortez, Pizarro. Basically, he goes down South America and runs into the Inca, and the whole thing of basically capturing the Inca emperor and getting him to fill, I think, if I remember correctly, 8 rooms with gold in exchange for his life, and they wound up killing him anyway. Sometimes it's not best to pay the ransom, I guess. Okay. So of course, here's Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus is one of the big guys, of course. The old rhyme, he sailed the ocean blue in 1492, lands in the modern day Caribbean. He goes back to Spain and brings some things he found and kind of tells them about this brand new land, different things here, and how it might be a great idea for Spain to expand that way. He's the one who, some people argue, maybe or maybe not discovered it, but he at least brought it back to the attention of the Europeans. We can argue over who got there first later. Okay. About that time too is also this gentleman right here, Hernan Cortez, who's famous. He will later on go to conquer the Aztec Empire. I'll play this video for you. It does a very nice little job of summing up Hernan Cortez and some of the interesting things he does.
Hernan Cortez is remembered for conquering the Aztec Empire and also for being the first governor of New Spain.
Hernan Cortez was born around 1485 in Medellin, Spain, to a noble family.
Hernan Cortez left Spain in 1504 for Hispaniola and then ends up in Cuba in 1511.
Cortez convinced the Cuban governor to appoint him captain general of a large expedition to establish a colony in Mexico in 1518.
In Mexico, Cortez establishes Veracruz and has himself elected as the captain general.
Cortez chose to scuttle his ships so that there would not be a turning back to Cuba.
At the time, what is now Mexico was governed by the Aztecs, and Cortez set out for their capital, Tenochtitlan.
When he arrives in the capital, he meets Moctezuma, the emperor of the Aztec Empire, gives him gifts, and then promptly takes him hostage.
Cortez was distracted, however, when he learned that the Cuban governor sent a force to confront him. Leaving Pedro de Alvarado in charge of Tenochtitlan while he dealt with this new threat, Cortez took the Cuban commander hostage and then convinced the troops to switch sides and join him.
When Hernan Cortez returns to Tenochtitlan, he finds Tenochtitlan up in arms because Pedro de Alvarado, during his absence, massacred several priests, committed atrocities.
Cortez insisted that Montezuma intervene. Montezuma faced the rioting crowds and was killed by a rock thrown by protesters.
The Spanish are then driven from the city with considerable losses in what is called the Noche Triste, or sad night. And Cortez then is forced to regroup.
With the help of many native allies who did not like the Aztecs, Cortez returned to Tenochtitlan in 1521, laid siege to the city, and finally conquered it.
In 1523, Cortez is named the captain general of New Spain and governor of Mexico.
Eventually, Cortez returned to exploring. He traveled through Central America and discovered California. In 1541, he retired to his estate in Sevilla, Spain, and died on December 2nd, 1547.
Cortez's legacy is a complex one. On one hand, he is the conqueror of Mexico. He brought and extended the Spanish Empire. But from the indigenous point of view, he was a mass murderer.
Conquering the Aztec Empire led to the destruction of one of the greatest civilizations that was known in the world at that time.
Okay.
Mark Twain is now thought of as America's first
No, thank you. We
celebrity
will talk about
because
Mark Twain
he
at
was
another
so
time. But okay, so moving right along. So Cortez is not the only conquistador, but he is definitely one of the big ones. He is famous for, like you saw, the Aztec Empire. Pizarro is another guy who is one of the ones who goes down into modern day South America and fights the Incas. They do find lots of gold in Peru, of course. Then we have this guy, this gentleman right here. His name is Ferdinand Magellan. Very interesting fellow. Basically, he gets bankrolled by King Charles I of Spain because the Spanish do figure out pretty quickly that this is not the same islands they were looking for, but this is something brand new, and they still want to get to the Spice Islands. So of course they bankroll Ferdinand Magellan to connect the Americas with Asia, or just to find a route to get there, and he's going to be the one who sails all the way down around the southern tip of, I can get back to it, South America right here, and out across the Pacific. Well, he will land over here, right above Australia in the Philippines, and where he will stop his voyage. Oh, no, back. Okay, so he will stop his voyage there because even though he's technically sometimes erroneously said to be the first man to circumnavigate the Earth, he doesn't make it all the way. He dies in the Philippines by getting involved in island politics and basically dying. Two of his ships decide to make a break for it. They leave. One of them limps back to Spain, and technically that's the ship that does circumnavigate the Earth. The gentleman who was technically the captain of that ship, I cannot remember his name at the moment. I do apologize about that. He's not someone you generally see bandied about in just survey courses. Maybe if you get a little more detailed, you can find him sometimes a little bit more. Okay, so if you're thinking about your map of Europe, just above Spain is France, and France and Spain will be enemies, and they'll be doing some battling about. But before we get to the French, let's talk a little more about the Spanish. So when the Spanish are here, one of the things they do is they do find ways to basically make money out of this thing. They don't quite find the spices they're looking for. They do find other things. They do find silver in some areas, much like this piece of 8 from a sunken treasure galleon off the coast of Florida. They will basically find silver mines in Mexico around Zacatecas. Down in South America, they find San Luis Potosí. Let's see what's going on somewhere. Something popping up. They also figure out the encomienda system, basically using big grants of land to also do things like trying to protect, quote unquote, and teach the Americans Catholic faith, as well as to make money off these lands by growing things like sugar and other very valuable things that can make lots of money back in Europe. And it basically goes from there. Unfortunately, not everything goes wonderfully, because of course some of these guys do have pure intentions, and some of them not so much. It's people after all. But some things that will happen and some unintended side effects are definitely going to be disease. Like you see up in the left-hand corner, this is actually from, if I remember correctly, it's at least a rendition of something from I want to say central Mexico, about the effects of European diseases, because of course the Americas had been isolated for some time. So as the Europeans came over, things that they're used to, such as smallpox, measles, mumps, chickenpox, things of that nature, which was just childhood diseases that most people survived and lived happily with and could do just fine, just a minor inconvenience. The Native Americans were not so well equipped to handle, and many of them will die. There's varying estimates, but let's just say this: lots of them will die. And of course, with the encomienda system, if you're working in the mines, you're working in the fields, you're going to need labor. And they find they're not the first ones, but they do find a ready source in Africa, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, where there is a slave trade, where basically between tribes and peoples who are fighting, whoever loses the war oftentimes would be sold into slavery. And when the Europeans show up, They provide different things that the locals would like and buy slaves off them. Of course, where there is money to be made and profit to be had, things will happen. So slaves will be brought over to the Americas to work in the mines, work in the plantations, growing sugar, tobacco, and things of that nature, and will be a thing in the Americas for many, 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 many years. That's where you have the one down in the bottom right here. We have the image of a slave ship up in the right-hand corner. Down in the bottom, we have where it kind of shows the map of where most slaves are going. Yes, some do come to America, and lots of them do go to the Caribbean where the sugar islands are. Okay, what we got? So. Oh, sweet. Okay. So Ms. Priam, I'm going to probably butchering that name. That's good to know. So you guys are showing that in 6th. You guys are talking about this in 6th, 7th, and 8th. Awesome. That is very heartening to know. Because sometimes when we get kids, yes, because sometimes we get the kids and they're like, what? I've never heard this before. It's like,
yeah, we've never heard of this in our life. Like, what are you talking about?
yes. Every once in a while we get lucky and one kid's like, I think I remember something vaguely like this. It's like, yes, finally something. Okay. So moving right along, we do have the slave trade coming in. That's one way the Spanish are making money. They're making money off tobacco, off of sugar, off the mines. They'll bring over so much gold and silver that they actually create an inflation problem. One funny thing I was telling Dr. Bain about this afternoon, I can't remember where it is. If I can find it, I will share it with Dr. Bain, and she can share it with you if you're interested. I do remember there was something, I can't remember if it was a prince or it was a mercenary, but he was complaining basically before the New World was really discovered, you could basically carry a month's wages in a small purse. Well, afterwards, you might need a small burro to carry your wages or your loot too, of course, because the value of gold's going down because the Spanish are bringing so much of it over and relying on those treasure ships, where they're hiring mercenaries and basically being a menace in Europe because they're beating a lot of people up and taking a lot of places over, which is of course good fun, but is more in the world history vein than we are going tonight. Okay, one thing we do need to talk about too is with the discovery of rediscovery of the New World by the Europeans, and technically what is often called the Old World, we have some things that we start trading back and forth. We call this the Columbian Exchange. One of the cool things about this is where we get some things like corn, potatoes, peppers, turkey, tobacco, vanilla, beans are coming from North America. Some of these wonderful things that make life very fun, especially for any chocolate fans out there. This is where cacao beans come from. This is a huge thing. And one really interesting thing that I honestly didn't notice until a few days ago, I didn't realize quinine had came from North America. This is one thing that's going to allow the exploration of much more tropical regions and keep people from dying from malaria so easily later on. Coming from the Old World, we have, of course, our cattle, our sheep, our pigs, our horses, which is going to be a huge thing for the Native Americans because sometimes this is where some diseases are thought to have come from that allowed the Europeans to be immune to them over the Old World. And since these did not exist over in the Americas, they were not quite so used to them in the Americas. They had other things they had to worry about. So that's one of the things there. Also, horses are going to be a big deal because if I remember correctly, you guys do talk about, especially with like a Texas history, the Apaches, the Comanches, who become very good horsemen, and the Comanches themselves, who will be a extreme danger to Texas and colonization all the way up to the 1870s.
And Mr. Ray, I'm so glad you mentioned that because everybody, if you haven't taken a note of this, and you remember we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, the Native American tribes, you need to go back into 240 tutoring and click on that. Sorry, Mr. Ray, because this all flows together. Okay. It's not just independent. I didn't know that about quinine either. I did not know about that about quinine. And sugar too, Mr. Ray. Is sugar on there? Does that come later?
No, sugar's on there because sugar comes from the Old World. It comes from the Mediterranean region, if I remember correctly. The thing about this thing is a lot of those things like coffee, one of my favorites, sugarcane and grapes. Those come from the old world, but sugarcane, bananas, they grow wonderfully in this warm, tropical, humid climates down here. And this will be a huge moneymaker because, of course, if anybody's ever had anything sweet, and I don't think anybody would say they haven't, you know sugar is very addictive, as is caffeine. But okay, so moving right along. Make sure I'm on the right track, try to keep track of myself. Okay, so enough about the Spanish. Let's talk about the French. So the French are very close to Spain. So they are one of the ones who are going to deal with Spain and their bullying from all the riches and the wonders they find in the New World. So they decide they want a piece of the action. And they will, of course, try to come over too. They will do something very similar to what the Spanish do with Magellan. They try to find a way to reach Asia across the Atlantic as well, searching for the elusive Northwest Passage. Many Europeans at this point in time didn't quite understand that the way to get around North America is going to be covered in ice, so you can't quite get up there. But that doesn't mean they're going to stop trying. The Spanish found the Southern Passage, you could say the Southwest Passage, with the going around of South America, which is a very dangerous voyage, but doable. So when the French come over here, they run into upper North America, the Canadian region right here. Everything you see here in blue will be eventually under France was controlled by at least 1750, and right before the French and Indian War. This is where we get New Orleans, we get the Baton Rouge, all these different things right here. We get large pieces of Canada, as well as a lot of the Midwest and central part of the country. And unlike the Spanish, they didn't find Native American groups here who were working with gold and silver, such as the Aztecs or the Inca, but they do find something else. They find fur. That's gonna be their big money maker here when it comes to the North American continent. They'll also be down the Caribbean, and they'll be having those sugar islands and later tobacco islands as well. And they'll be doing that too. But they do find out, that, furs are very warm, because this is a really interesting piece of history that at this point in time, a lot of historians talk about a mini ice age, because the 1700s, from later medieval periods, about the late 1400s through about the early 1800s, they call a little ice age. Things are a little colder, so furs are very warm, and also things like beaver and other aquatic critters like that are great for deflecting water and staying warm. It looks very nice. And the French discover very quickly, yes, there's lots of Native Americans out here. Some of these guys are very warlike and are very, very good at it, and they do hit and run tactics, and you probably don't want to fight them. So they figure out that they could trade with them. That's where you see all these forts on here, like Fort Orleans, Fort Detroit, Montreal, Fort Richelieu, things like that, where basically they discover that they can trade the Native Americans trinkets, guns, hatchets, and other interesting items for fur. It's a little bit of an exaggeration, but with the 8th graders, oftentimes we'll talk about it, like imagine aliens coming down and trading you new and fancy equipment, like new phones, better TVs, or things that are just beyond our understanding at this point in time, but we'd love to have in exchange for clothing or something that's extremely common to you. I'm not sure who wouldn't take that offer. I think I'd be right there with anybody else trying to trade as much as I could. And that's what the French will do, and that's what will make the Indians in the French and Indian War much more likely to side with the French, because in North America, they are not going to be as heavily populated as the British will be, for different reasons we'll talk about. And also, when it comes to converting Indians, there is conversions in New France. There are wandering missionaries. They don't quite go in so much for the missions like the Spanish do. The Spanish are much more about converting the natives and doing things of that nature. Like you have around here in San Antonio, we have a bunch of missions. I don't know if there's any in the valley. I don't believe there are off the top of my head. But if you come up to San Antonio, you can see some missions where they were trying to convert the local Native Americans. The French do that a little bit, but they're more for the wandering missionaries, more for trade. That's kind of their shtick. Okay. In the interest of time, moving on. So yes, so here's Jacques Cartier. He's basically hired by the French king to find that North Passage. He doesn't find it. He's the guy who finds essentially what is modern day Canada. Claims it from France, sails back home. And of course, he takes some people from the areas, particularly the Iroquois, to talk about it too. And the French say, okay, cool. We have a piece of this now as well. Awesome. Okay. Now, quick thing to talk about. We have the English. The English, on the other hand, they're a little bit different. They're coming for many different reasons. They're a little late to the game. They're coming in the late 1500s, early 1600s. They are basically settling in that more eastern area right here that would be the eastern seaboard of the U.S. and a little bit of Newfoundland, things like that too. And this will run into some interesting little fights here as well as the Caribbean. But a lot of the reasons are a little bit different. They're looking for religious things because at this point in time, you got to remember the Protestant Reformation is going on. You probably have talked about that in your world history stuff, where the Catholic Church and different sects of the Protestants have basically split from each other, and they don't really like each other. Things are a little violent here. We'll get the 30 Years' War in the 1600s. You'll have the English Civil War, where there'll be fights over Catholics and Christians, a little bit in the government as well. You get Mary Queen of Scots and all that in very interesting things in the late 1500s. So we had Plymouth Colony, they're coming over here because, of course, they were oh, sorry, pardon me, I'm getting ahead of myself. Down the left-hand corner, you have Roanoke. Roanoke is, of course, the first English settlement, but it's not permanent. They basically settle in, if I remember correctly, it's about modern-day North Carolina. The guy who founded it basically goes home to get some supplies, comes back, and it's one of the first great mysteries of early American history. We're not 100% sure what happened to them. There's many different theories, ranging from as silly as you like, such as aliens, or to the thing of they just basically went to live with the Native Americans because things were not going well for them, and the natives happened to be friendly. But hey.
So, I'm sorry, Roanoke was the first what?
English settlement in the eastern seaboard. It's the late 1500s, but it's not permanent. It's just one of those things that pops up from time to time. The first permanent one is your top right-hand corner. That's Jamestown. This is the big one. It's permanent. It stays. It lasts. And that's 1607. Roanoke's just something to know. They did try before. They failed, but Jamestown's the first permanent.
And aren't there a lot of conspiracies about Roanoke? Like, did they actually move? Aliens pick them up? I mean, I was like, really? Aliens? But
yes.
I mean, there's a lot of theories out there, right?
Yes, ma'am, there are. That's one of the first great things of early American history, where you can start seeing those conspiracies almost as much as you do with JFK and things like that. But that's Roanoke for sure. It failed. It's interesting. It might pop up, but it's usually not something they test on a lot. It might pop up once, if at all. The big one you'll see is Jamestown, 1607. They're landing. The Pocahontas movie from Disney is a horrible mismanagement of that story, but you get the idea. They came here originally, they're looking for money. Their reason for coming is gold. They are looking to make cash. That's their main item. At first, they were looking for gold and silver, much like the Spanish had found when they landed and run into the Aztecs, the Incas, and other native groups like that. They don't find anything, of course. They go through the starving time because, Doc, you might remember this. If you remember when we were talking about this with the kids, we were showing them the manifest of like who came over, and like 50 of them were something called gentlemen.
Well,
It's okay. So
can't remember. That's gone. Are we talking about over on what time period? Is that what we're looking for? What time period?
Well, yeah,
Year?
that'd be like 1607. When they first came over, a lot of the guys that came over were gentlemen. Technically, at that point in time, it was not just
And that was
like
one
where
of
you're
the,
talking to.
and that was one of the big differences between the British, the Spanish, the French. The British came for escaping religious persecution. So it's very different. They brought women and children and they were like, we're going to start a new life. And then the Spanish, the conquistadors, I mean, they came meaning business.
Mhm.
So that kind of contributed absolutely to Roanoke failing. And even Jamestown, I mean, like Jamestown was there, but they were just kind of hanging on by their, I don't know, right? Like if it weren't for the Indians, Jamestown would not have made it. I hate to even say Native Americans, they wouldn't have made it. So it was not a big success. And Mr. Wright knows, I mean, is that, so I guess when we hear of like the founding Plymouth people, I mean, yeah, that's great. You came over. But I mean, in Jamestown, but I mean, like it wasn't like they were superstar rocking it out. And they may ask that on the test. What was the difference? And what would you say the main reason the French came? Was it furs or like who was coming? Who was coming? Was it soldiers too, or were they trying to bring their
It
family?
was no, you got it perfectly right. Basically, the Spanish and the French, the big difference is it's all about getting rich and getting back home. You're generally not trying to start your family if you're a French or you're Spanish. You want to get rich, go back, marry a proper French woman or a proper Spanish female woman, and then become a lord, a lady, whatever you would like to be.
Mhm.
And with the English, they're trying to come here to settle. And another big thing is with the French and the Spanish, it's very much government led. That's not the case with the British. The British is very much private enterprise. It's very much, they're like companies. This is where we get those first corporations, those joint stock companies who are going out there.
Make sure you know that, y'all. Make sure you know that because they will ask that on the test.
What did the Spanish want again? Sorry.
Oh, no worries. You got it perfectly fine. They're basically coming, they're looking for gold, also to spread Christianity. That's a big thing for them. That's why they have the mission systems. Okay. So we have Jamestown. They're hanging on by a thread. They don't do too great early on. They eventually figure it out and they start working together. They start doing a little bit better. They, of course, have the Native Americans who basically decide to save them. And they figure out tobacco grows really well there. And one of the great things about tobacco is it's highly addictive. So as you grow it and people smoke it, they want more. And even at that point in time, some people did understand tobacco was bad. I think it was King James of England at one point said, this thing smells bad, it's disgusting, and it's going to kill you. So a little interesting thing there. Plymouth Colony up at the top, they are very much your religion guys. They are the ones coming because we call them the Puritans because when it came to the Church of England, which had broken off from the Catholics, they're the ones who say, yes, this is great, we're no longer Catholic, but we're still not doing it right. We need to, quote unquote, purify or keep on fixing it. And what they're going to do here is basically, they're going to leave because the Church of England basically decides, how about we purify you? And they say, okay, we're getting out of here. It's probably safer. Yes, Jamestown is Virginia. Plymouth Colony, interestingly enough, is nowhere near Jamestown or Roanoke. Jamestown's Virginia, Roanoke's North Carolina, pretty close by it. Plymouth Colony's up in Massachusetts. The story goes that basically the Pilgrims were supposed to go to Jamestown, but were whining and complaining, and they basically almost got kicked out, essentially, by the ship captain and that crew. And when they wind up, because they're sailing down the coast of North America, so they get kicked out and they decide, oh, crud, here we go. But they decide they are okay with this for a very good reason. Because with no government there, they can do what they like. That includes religion. Okay. Now, there's one group here I haven't talked about so far. Okay. Oh, yes, Massachusetts, my bad. Plymouth Colony is Massachusetts. So this is Boston, up around Boston area. It's up there because they get kicked out. They get kicked out of the ship as it's supposed to be heading down to Jamestown. That's where they were originally supposed to land. Yes. Okay. Yikes, I am dragging. I need to move on a little bit more. Sorry about that.
You're doing good. This is good information because there's a lot of questions on American history, y'all. There's a lot of questions on yes. Thank you, Amanda, for putting that. It's great information. There's a lot of questions. Remember, we're taking the test in Texas. So there's going to be a lot of stuff on Texas and American history.
Okay. So there's one group I've not talked about that they might ask you questions about. This is the Dutch. The reason why I don't talk about the Dutch much is because they don't last long. Basically, they'll found modern day New York City. They'll call it New Amsterdam. And basically, they are strictly there for money. They are business, and that is what they do. They're trading. That's their main thing. They trade for furs. They do things like that. They're not really interested in religion. And in the 1644, if I remember correctly, the Duke of York basically shows up with a couple of big boats with guns and soldiers and says, it belongs to us now. And there's not enough Dutch to basically fight back, and they give up. They're like, okay, we still do business here. This is fine. Just please don't kill us. But okay, so getting into New England colonies, this is a big thing in 8th grade history, and I'm pretty sure they'll ask you questions about this in the lower grades as well. Just different climates. So as you see the map right here, it's very pitted. There's lots of great harbors, but the coast is very rocky. It's cold. So one of the big things they're going to do up here is they are going to, oh, sorry, before I get ahead of myself. It's rocky, it's cold, but it's got some great harbors. It's a lot of coastline. The soil here stinks. It's rocky, it's infertile, it's hard to grow things. You can grow and have a nice little farm, but you're probably not going to be growing enough to sell it to the local market as much. You're definitely not growing any of this wonderful sugar or tobacco that's going to make you rich. That doesn't grow here. It's too cold. The ground's not that great. Basically, the local Native Americans had to teach them how to plant in that area. So we get the traditional story around Thanksgiving where you have Squanto walking into Plymouth Colony and basically showing them like, hey, you need to plant some fish or fertilizer for the crops here to grow the maize and the beans and things like this. They help them figure out, help them get through this time because the Native Americans look at them and say, okay, these guys are potential allies and we want to go beat up on our neighbors. So since they can't do a lot of farming up here, you're not growing your money makers, they find out very quickly there's lots of trees. So what you can do is you can be building ships, you can do trading. There's wood out here, and wood is very much needed if you want to build a big fleet, which is what Britain is going to be very famous for throughout most of its history up to like World War II, of having a huge navy to defend themselves. So New England's going to be big for fishing, for building ships, trading. There'll be also whaling out there, which is going to be a very fun thing where you're out in a small little boat trying to harpoon one of the world's largest mammals. So have fun. Good luck. Not many of them. It's a very dangerous job.
So sad. It makes it, oh, I hate that.
But hey, if you want to work at night, whale oil will burn bright. And if you would like a corset to look a little better shape, or just because it's the fashion, whalebone, which is basically like cartilage, works great for stays in a corset. And then one of the fun things, it's always hilarious to do this with the 8th graders, to talk to them and ask them what they think this middle image is. And the fun thing here is that once they figure out that it's salted fish and that's food, a lot of them, we get a lot of ewes and things like that. But when you think about this, this is a time when life is rough. Starvation is a real danger for many people. So what's going to happen here is they will salt the fish that pack because there's no freezers, because it basically pulls the water out so you can have it for later. You make a fish stew. You're probably not going to chew on it like jerky, but you can rehydrate it. It's cool. Okay. I know I've been kind of rambling. If anybody is lost, please let me know.
Guys, you notice how Mr. Ray is telling a story. That's what it's about. But you have to know the content. And I know that for first year, you know, we don't expect you to know all of this just as fluently as Mr. Ray does. But you see how he's telling this story, how all of it goes together. That's what you need to be looking for. And it's going to be a little bumpy that first year teaching, maybe second year, because you got a lot of content. But just know, we've all been there and you'll get it done.
Very much. Okay, so that's New England. Not a lot here, so you got to leave. You got to build your ships, you got to go fishing, you got to go trading. Thank you, Ms. Garcia. Just really appreciate you. Okay, moving right along. Here we go. So in the middle colonies, this one we talk about the kids is basically think of it like Goldilocks. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, it's just right. The winters aren't as rough as New England, but the summers aren't as long or as warm as down south, where it's kind of like us here. Maybe not hitting 100 every day, but pretty high and very humid. So this is what we're going to call the bread basket. This one, they're not growing tobacco and they're not growing sugar, which you make a lot of money at. They have much larger farms because the soil's good, but not great. They're growing wheat, which can be turned into flour, which turns into bread, which is a very cheap commodity, but you can feed lots of people with it. So it's wonderful. So you're gonna have small family farms. This is a fun one to show the kids because they start pointing out things they see, like you have mom, dad, babies up in a basket because baby can't walk right now and might get into something and might get hurt. And then the son, I'm assuming, right here working alongside, even though that guy's probably, I'll bet you what, 5, 6, maybe. It's all about the family farm. That being said, we call this the grain basket. They grow lots of wheat, barley, and oats, other things that have been turned into delicious bread, but they also do other things like wood. They do a lot of lumber here as well, because there's once again lots of forests, beautiful stuff like that, which works great. It used to be make houses, to burn in furnaces, to build ships, do what you need to do. This is also one of the most cosmopolitan. This is where we have the most diversity. When you get to New England, you're basically dealing with the Puritans and people of that stock. Some different types in here are going to pop up that are think a little bit differently, but not a whole lot. In the middle colonies, it's much more open, relatively. So there's a little more different types of Protestants. In here, there's Swedish, there's Germans, there's Scottish, like Dr. Bain's ancestors and part of mine. There's the French here, we got the Germans, various things like this. They're coming here because you can have a brand new life. And instead of being in the old country, where you are basically renting from a landlord and you're at the mercy of them, or maybe losing your job or something like that, you can come out here, you can own your own farm. You can own your own house. You can basically almost be the master of your own fate, provided the Indians don't get you or local wars. Okay, so moving on down, we have the southern colonies. This is the big one. This is where we're growing those things that make the Spanish and the French so much money. We're growing sugar, we're growing tobacco, and later cotton. But for this point in time, that's not a big deal because they don't find a way to make it pay until much later. So as you see right here, when it comes to the southern colonies by 1750, the big thing is indigo, which is how you get a lovely blue dye. It's very rich. Pigs, rice, and tobacco. That's the big items down here, the southern colonies. This is your plantations. This is where most of the slaves are. There's slaves everywhere in the colonies, but most, when it comes to the North American British colonies, it's down south. That's where you find the most of them. They need them to pick tobacco, to pick the indigo, rice, to things of that nature. Okay, moving right along. So here, the land is the name of the game. The ground is much richer. It's much more fertile. Things grow better down here that need that tropical climate. Your sugar, your tobacco, and indigo. This is kind of what a tobacco field looks like. This is from Colonial Williamsburg. Tobacco leaves are big. They dry them out, and that's where you get tobacco that you see in like cigarettes and things like that. They've been dried out by the sun over usually a period of months or so. Okay, now when it comes to different things here, the colonies start kind of forming their own ideas of government because they're very far away from England. It's kind of hard to go and talk to the king and parliament who gave you your charters and your technically your license to set up when you have a problem, because by the time you get a message back, the problem might be solved or it's gotten much worse than it was before. So you got to figure it out yourself. One of the first ones to pop up is the Virginia House of Burgesses. Originally, it was, as you can see right there, to set the minimum price of tobacco, because hey, Virginia originally was a colony all about cash, trying to make the money here. So of course, their first order of business was setting minimum sale prices. But later they'll start figuring out things about like, okay, maybe we need to make our own rules, kind of come up with different laws here and discover things what's going on. Originally, of course, it was only white men who owned a specific amount of property were eligible, and that'll be the case in a lot of areas up until the 1820s. You'll have to be a white man and own property, which basically put a lot of people out when it comes to that. Okay, and like we said before, Virginia was first established. Jamestown is your first English colony. That's where the Pilgrims were trying to go when things went awry. Here we go. Yes, House Burgess is probably gonna be a likely one. They'll usually ask about that. That's the first elected assembly. It's a representative assembly, technically. You're electing people to make laws for you. The Mayflower Compact is technically the first, like, usually what it's seen as is like the first like governing compact of like first form of self-government, because when they set up in Massachusetts, there was no English government here. They were basically starting it. And if you ever read the Mayflower Compact, there's not a lot to it. They basically say they're gonna come together, they're gonna talk things out, they're gonna figure things what needs to be done, and they promise to do it all for their families and the king. And they're gonna work together. That's the Mayflower Compact. We're gonna come together, we're gonna work together, we're not going to die, hopefully. Keep your fingers crossed. Okay. Of course, there's some other people that might pop up here. This one might be more of an 8th grade thing, so I'm gonna kind of skip. I'm gonna talk about it, but I'm gonna be a little brief with him. Mr. Thomas Hooker in Connecticut. This was founded because basically what's going on is there's dissension in the colonies about various things, such as how do we treat Native Americans? How do we treat each other? What if I don't want to worship that way? What do you mean you want to kill me? No, wait, this isn't good. So basically, lots of people leave in certain points. This is where you get a lot of those New England colonies are founded by people who didn't agree with the original guys in Massachusetts. In 1636, he and some followers settled in Connecticut. They established the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, which is technically our first written constitution. Non-members could vote. He wanted to treat Native Americans like people. Kind of a revolutionary idea, apparently, in some cases. Oftentimes he might get called the father of democracy. He might or might not pop up on your test. Just remember the funny guy, the guy with the funny name that makes 8th graders sticker is the guy for Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. Pardon?
They might ask that the first, yeah, they may, but make sure that you understand the Mayflower Compact and the Virginia House of Burgesses. But
yes.
Yeah, they may ask this, but I'm thinking the first two for sure. I'm trying to remember on that test, Mr. Ray. I think they do ask that.
Okay, because I'll be honest with you, as I'm going through this, I'm looking at 240 tutoring, making sure I'm hitting the points again. So
that's
yeah,
awesome.
I'm dual wielding over here, so If I'm looking off to the side, I'm lost. That's what's going on.
No. And y'all, Mr. Ray is pulling from the teaks on the two. So literally when we go do these little tutoring sessions, and I know some of y'all have not clicked on my Greece and ancient Rome, and I get it. It's a little, but just click on it, listen to it. But we're going through all the teaks, through all the points that's assigned to the EC through 6. So everything that's being taught tonight could be tested on the EC through 6. There's a wide range. Remember, you're covering a lot, but even just hearing this the way we're doing it, I mean, you're a leg up, right?
It helps.
Yes, it does. Perfect.
Okay. Another thing, I don't have a slide for this one, but just good to know. In the northern colonies, especially, they have something called town halls. This is going to appear because a lot of times, if you're part of that community, you're also part of the local church. So it's a nice meeting place. You're going to get together. They're going to make decisions about that local community. And basically, they'll, of course, decide laws for the local community. They'll make decisions for the local community, things like that. So that's good to know. That does pop up on your 240 tutoring over here. So just so you know, another thing I do want to point out, the British colonies are operating pretty independently compared to Spanish and French colonies. Spanish and French, the government is very much right there because this is a way they can make cash. So that way they can do all kinds of things over in Europe, as well as to be the absolute monarchs, which are happening at this point in time. The British are pretty hands-off comparatively. They're kind of like, okay, y'all do you, give us our cut, we don't care. Which will pop up later. Oh, yes, there you go. First reading Constitution. This, once again, the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, it pops up. Good to know. It's the religiously tolerant for the most part, protecting individual rights, first reading Constitution. Awesome. Okay, so we have the English colonies set up. And then we have a very interesting thing is technically the English have laws called the Navigation Acts, which I believe were passed in the late 1660s, saying you as a colony, you can only trade with England, at least with approved merchants, because they want to make sure they get their cut. This is going to be a system called mercantilism, which I believe I have on the next slide, where basically the mother country is getting all those items from the colonies, such as gold, silver, fur, lumber, foodstuffs, anything that might be able to help them. It's all about making sure the mother country is doing well, is strong, can fight, is doing great. It's not so much about what's good for the colonies, but as a colonist, your life is probably still going to be better than the guy in the streets of London. We'll talk about over in British colonies later. Especially toward the American Revolution, that colonists sometimes are taller, they're broader, they're healthier because they had food, less disease, things like that, because it's not quite as packed over here in the colonies as it is over in the old country. Ooh, echoing. Okay, I apologize. That might be my foot up here too.
Guys, make sure that am I echoing too? Okay, make sure though that if you do have your microphone on, please mute it, because that could be interfering as well. I'm not sure. Mr. Ray, you want to try it again? See if you're echoing.
Okay. Check 1, 2, 3. Anybody?
It's still echoing a little bit, but you turned a little bit and it was better. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll kind of point this way. Maybe this will help a little bit, kind of dampen the sound.
Maybe mute yourself and then unmute yourself. See if that helps. Sometimes it might help.
Okay. Mic check. Checking mic.
It's still a little bit echoey, but it's a little better. Hold on.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate the warning. Okay, so as we're talking about with the England, especially, they do have the Navigation Acts. You are only supposed to trade with England or their approved contacts. But of course, like every law, there's going to be people who ignore it. And for a while, England will practice something called solitary neglect. Basically, they're getting their cut. They don't really have to spend money too much on the colonies. They're kind of like, okay, y'all can do you. Everybody's happy here, not a big deal. We're getting our peace. We're getting stronger. Do what you want. I don't care. Just make sure I get my cut. And of course, that all goes down the drain in 1754, thereabouts. Because one of the things is with the North American and British colonies, it's all about owning your own place, owning your own stuff, things like that. That's all well and good. The only problem is the land will kind of start to run out. So basically they have to find ways of getting more. So that means heading deeper in. So going over those Appalachian Mountains, heading out into the bush. This is where you get the Scots and the Irish who are coming over here, and they're going back into the mountains, and they're running into more Native Americans. Now, unfortunately, they run into the French, and the French aren't exactly happy to have some English trespassers in their land, as are the Native Americans. Because as we talked about with the 8th graders, how would you feel if somebody set up shop in your living room? Most of our 8th graders sound pretty angry about it and talk about wanting to shoot them and kill them. And that's a lot of times what happens. Okay, so the big thing for the French and Indian War, so we're getting toward the end of this, is going to be the Ohio River Valley, which you can kind of see on this map right here next to the frontiersmen. It's over the Appalachian Mountains. It's, well, as the name implies, the Ohio River. Was fairly fertile. You can grow things here. You can do some nice things. We got, write that down. And the British, our settlers, are pushing into this area, and they're running into French trappers, and they're making the natives mad because the French trappers and the missionaries are not taking land. They're just coming by, saying hi, doing some business, telling you about Jesus, and going about their merry way. The British, on the other hand, are coming in saying hi and bringing you a casserole and saying, we live here now, so howdy, neighbor. One problem is that might have been a local area that you claimed, or at least your people claimed. So of course the natives are going to get very, very angry. Now, moving right along, we have the French did not settle the Ohio River Valley, of course, will later become the Northwest Territory. They built trading things, they paid natives to use their land, and they generally got along well with them because there's not that many French guys running around. So they figured out we can't conquer them, so we might as well just work with them. A lot cheaper that way too. So they trade for guns, trade furs, guns, horses for peace, and also just trade. Natives are fairly happy, on they go. The British coming in and taking land. That's one of the main reasons we call this the French and Indian War. Because when it comes to the French and Indian War, basically most Native Americans are going to ally with the French. There's going to be one major exception, and that's going to be the Iroquois. The Iroquois basically don't have a great relationship with the French, and it becomes an enemy of my enemy is my friend. So they join up with the British, but for the most part, it's the British and the colonists fighting the Native Americans, tag team, early on. This is also a very fun one, at least in my mind, because what's going on here, it's one of the first wars to spread the other way. Wars have happened in North America at this point in time. It happened all the time. Most time it started in Europe and spread to the colonies. This one could be considered the first one to go the other way, because oftentimes one of the beginnings of the French and Indian War, which the Europeans will call the 7 Years' War, is started because of one little man, or not little man, but one young officer you might have heard of called George Washington. As a very young officer, he's leading a force to negotiate with some French who are in land claimed by Virginia, and well, things go awry, and let's just make a long story short, they shoot a French emissary. A French diplomat is killed. One thing is to another. Eventually, he'll be trying to set up and will become Fort Necessity. They get thrown out by the French, and what could have been just a small border beef turned into a much larger war. So with this thing, when this thing goes down, oh, no worries, Miss Lords, if you need me to repeat something, I definitely can, by all means. So, as I was saying, most of the Native Americans are joining with the French. Things happen, there's a border beef, it turns into a larger war. Early on, they called the Albany Plan of Union, about 1754. This is actually put out by Mr. Franklin, Ben Franklin of Bridgeport Almanac, founding father fame. And his whole idea is that these colonies who are very much disunited, much like this snake right here, need to join up because there's going to be a large war. And there's lots of very angry natives out there and not a few French soldiers. So they need to join up so they can fight properly. The only problem is, like most group projects, it doesn't go very well. It doesn't really happen. So basically, they try to unite. They convince some to kind of work together. They do discuss strengthening ties with the Iroquois. So the Iroquois nation goes fairly well, but the plan doesn't work. The Iroquois decide to help them, but the colonies do not unite. They're pretty, probably a D- on this group project. And as you get here, I hate group projects, rejected both by the colonists and the government. The King of England doesn't really necessarily want the colonies working together because that could be a problem down the road. Whole thing of, if you guys get used to working together, what do you need me for? He would create a different government, different control. Colonists didn't see any value in the unity, and they worried about losing their individual power, saying, okay, if we give up power here, we have less power over our own selves. So we're not going to be doing that. Okay, this is what I was talking about. I'm not going to play this one for sake of time. This one just kind of shows the first thing. There's, as with everything here, don't let anybody fool you when they talk about Native Americans and like, oh, these poor Native Americans were abused and misused by the Europeans. Did that happen? Yes, but more often than not, you had some very people who were strong. They were proud. They knew they were very intelligent, and oftentimes would play one power off another. They're very good at this. And this is what happened with Washington. He had a chief with him when they shot the French diplomat that was basically on the outs with the French and used Washington as a bargaining chip. He used Washington as a tool to move on. So let's lead into the French and Indian War. This starts out, the British come out in force. They send lots of soldiers, and they're fighting in their lovely bright red coats, because this is how you fight in Europe. You fight in lines, you stand properly, we shoot at each other, and the British are wearing red because it's bright. It's a very cheap dye, as well as it's very fearsome. You can't see blood as well. They go marching in to basically take around Fort Pittsburgh. And the problem is the French don't fight fair. Well, they don't fight in the European style. They fight much like the Native Americans do. They're hiding in the trees. They're sniping. They do have some French regulars there who fight like the British do, but that's mainly a decoy. And the British at Braddock, under General Braddock, get shot to doll rags. This is where things go wrong. They'll eventually figure things out. Have no fear. They'll eventually figure out, hey, we need to fight this way too. Like everything, it's improvise, adapt, and overcome. They'll have the Rangers who kind of start using darker greens, so it's a little more blending in, fighting much like the Native Americans do, hiding behind trees, hit and run. Don't stand there and fight, because he who fights and runs away lives to fight another day. Okay, this one is good to know because oftentimes the French and Indian War, which in Europe is called the 7 Years' War, oftentimes called the First World War, because it's happening literally all over the world. In the different colonies of France and England and the different allies, warfare is going on. There's, of course, in North America, which was the original show. In the Caribbean, we have raids, counter raids, piracy, landings. It's very good fun if you like action adventure. There's even some stuff down in South America, on the west coast of Africa, at some of the outposts, they're fighting. There's lots of fighting in India. This is where this is kind of beginning the British Empire in India. There's fighting in Portugal, and there's fighting in Europe, of course, too, with the ally of the British called Prussia, basically taking on all comers with a little bit of help from the British, mainly in the form of money. Okay. Eventually, because the British figure out a very interesting thing, they figured out that you can finance a war with debt. They're oftentimes credited with figuring out very quickly that you can sell bonds for wars and things like this. So they'll be able to outspend the French and basically bleed them dry. And the French will eventually lose and give up, and they'll give up most of their North American territory. A lot of that area you saw where it was French belongs now to the British, and some of it is given to the Spanish. And the British now have a problem. They beat the French in North America. The French are gone. So the French part of the French and Indian War is gone. Not a worry anymore, per se. Indians are still there. They're very angry still. So this is where we get into the Proclamation of 1763, which does pop up in 240 tutoring. Basically, King George of England tells the colonists, you cannot go west of the Appalachian Mountains, because if you go out there, the Native Americans are going to beat up on you. I have to send more soldiers over there, and it's going to cost me more money. I'm already in a lot of debt because of the war you guys started. So don't go west. You can't do that. We promised the Native Americans that we won't let you go west to take their land. And that's one of their big things. And then, of course, Britain is on the hook for lots of money. So here we go. You have this, all this light red. I know this is a very blurry map, and I do apologize about that. But this is all land taken over by the British. It's now British. All these colonists want to go there because, once again, looking for cheap land so you can own your own stuff. They're told you can't go there because of this reason right here. Native Americans are still out there. They still live there. They are still there in force and do not exactly appreciate trespassers. And the British have to figure out ways to pay off this huge debt. So they're making the colonists mad by saying, can't go west. And they say, not only that, but that war you started was very expensive. This whole idea of salutary neglect might have to go away. You kind of need to start paying your fair share of taxes because you started it and we bailed you out. Now pay up, pay me back. And this will lead toward the American Revolution. Okay. That, ladies and gentlemen, is basically my little presentation. Are there any questions?
No, sir.
Okay. Oh, we got somebody in the chat. No,
Right, that was amazing. That was just so good, right, y'all? I mean,
Yes,
you
it was
can
really helpful.
yes, right?
Okay.
And you can see where you know, the content is when you're becoming I say becoming, you guys are already, I always say, Mr. Ray, you know, they're already out there teaching, you know, with their lessons and observations and things, but I don't think it actually prepares you, you know, nothing's going to prepare you except getting your own classroom and doing it. But what you can do is study this material. And Mr. Ray, I always give them the advice, but I think it's better when it comes from somebody else that's social studies composite certified, y'all. I want y'all to know that Mr. Ray is social studies composite certified. He can teach any single history subject. I say all that because y'all know I am, and so is he. But Mr. Ray, when you're studying history, how soon should they take this test? I mean, you know what I mean? I know they got their other content and stuff, but don't wait too long, right?
Yes, because that's always a key thing, because the quicker, the more fresh it is in your mind, the more likely you'll remember, the better you're likely to do on that test, because stories are great, stories are awesome, but over time, things happen. I know you guys have very busy lives. I know some of you have children, many of you work, there's other things going to come up. And I don't know about you guys, but it seems like if you go to bed and then the next morning, it's like, what was I talking about yesterday? Things like that.
That's
Just-
me every day. I'm like,
Yes.
wait a minute, what just happened? Like Groundhog Day. Sorry. And Mr.
Exactly.
Ray knows this, y'all, because we work together.
Don't let Doc fool you. She is very capable. She does an awesome job every day. Just self-deprecating humor. But yeah, so basically I'm very much with Doc. Take it as soon as you can.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, going into it, feeling like you're prepared, don't rush yourself, but at the same time, don't put it off. It's kind of balancing that, studying some more, but also taking it so you can get it out of the way and move on to your other stuff. Because I totally agree, the composite is a bear.
Yeah.
And with so much history you got to cover, there's so much stories, because this is just U.S. history. I know you guys got to do ancient civilizations, which seems fun, but I can imagine that'd be daunting. All those other things too. Just get it out of the way as quick as possible.
Now, yes, and the 240 tutoring works.
Mhm.
I'm gonna repeat it. It works because if you get the old school textbook, your just eyeballs are gonna glaze over and you're not gonna open it. Let's just be honest. So you've got to take that practice. They've been working on it, Mr. Ray. I mean, this has helped so much. And even a refresher, y'all, I've been teaching social studies for 14 years. And even I get up and I'm like, wait a minute, what was that? Or a student will ask me a question and they'll be like, oh, can you like help me look at this STAR test question? And then I have to read it 10 times myself to answer. So I'd say it's okay. You're always going to be learning, but make sure, and for the EC-6 test, it's not going to go crazy in depth, but they're going to ask you about Greek and Roman government, direct democracy, right? So the Greeks had direct democracies. They might ask you about Socrates. All this is going up to, you see how this leads up to the first sets of laws in the colonies, right? Our own government here in the United States. So it is important to be studying that. And I have recorded this. I do want to thank Mr. Ray. I'm going to stop recording in just a minute. But I hope y'all have taken notes, and please reach out to myself, and then I can get with Mr. Ray, or if Mr. Ray wants to share his email with y'all, but just reach out and we can help you. Okay. Now, next week,